We're going to move on now to the power of the pen, because behind every great film or theatre production, there is, of course, a great script, and behind every script is a great writer. And Michael Morpurgo, author of War Horse, is certainly one of those. The National Theatre's production of War Horse opened in 2007. There were 2 sellout seasons there before it moved to the West End, where you can still see the show, of course, as indeed you can on Broadway and in Toronto, and later this year in Australia as well. And then, of course, there's the film that was released last year by Disney DreamWorks and directed by Steven Spielberg. But War Horse is just one of the more than 100 books that Michael Morpurgo has written. He's won many prizes for them, including the Whitbread Award. And he's also been, between 2003 and 2005, the UK's Children's Laureate. Well, to interview Michael on the topic of the writer as creative catalyst, I'd like to welcome journalist and broadcaster, my former colleague, Evan Davis. Evan.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and we are now going to devote 20 minutes to the topic of books and writers. And I think we like to think we're very good at books in this country. I will let you judge whether the quality of the work is good, but I can tell you about the quantity. We publish over 100,000 titles a year in Britain, and we're one of only 4 countries to do that. Books bat above their weight. They create so many things beyond the mere printed word. They inspire, indeed they inspire great industries. And we will talk to Michael Morpurgo in a minute, someone who's created a book that exemplifies the way in which an author can write a work that becomes a global industry in its own right. We'll talk to him in a minute. But before that, let's just have a little video to tell us about the world of publishing and books and its impact, its high impact in this country. Let's run the video. I don't know whether they managed to get all 100,000 titles into that one video, but a little taste of the power of publishing there. Well, probably the only thing all those books had in common was that they had authors. And authors, you should see them as, they're the people who produce the seeds for creative industries, or for many of the creative industries. They produce the seeds that are planted and then grow into bushes, trees, and mighty forests. So we're going to talk to an author now, as Claire has told you all about him. Someone who's written many, many, many titles, one of which has really achieved a very grand global status, film, play, all of those, which is, of course, War Horse. Please welcome Michael Morpurgo. Michael, welcome. Why don't you sit next to me? I think that's how Stella sat. I think that...
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Book, play, film.
Yes.
My guess would be the film is 10 times the size of the play and the play 10 times the size of the book, in sort of revenue business terms?
Books catching up fast, I'd say. That's because I think the general perception in the world is it was written by Mr. Spielberg, which sort of helps. I mean, to give you an idea, when the book was deeply unsuccessful to start with. It sold no more than, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 copies a year. When it was published in 1982, it failed to win any prize at all. And then it got picked up by the National Theatre. And meanwhile, I think we had 3, 4 foreign translations, that's about it. It went to America, got published in America by Green Willow Press, failed. And then Spielberg comes along and does his thing, and it now has 47 translations. So it kind of makes a difference.
There are authors everywhere who've sold 1,000 copies who are saying to themselves, see, I knew I should stay in this business. So the play has been pretty successful, hasn't it? What's the difference between the play and the film in revenue terms?
Well, I would have thought the play would be overtaking the film right now. Well, because it's been on 5 years in London now. It's on Broadway, where it won its Tony Awards, and it's now doing a tour around America. It's about to tour England next year. It's going to Australia. I don't know, it's just going everywhere. I can't, to be honest, I really can't keep up with it. But I do think that it's, over the years, it's very likely to generate a great deal. And that's wonderful for the National Theatre, who started all this, because being one of the, I think it's probably the only theatre in the world that could spend 2 years on a project, invest in it. It's experimental theatre, these magnificent puppets. Most theatre companies wouldn't have looked twice at it because it was going to be too expensive and too long. But they stuck with it and stuck with it. And these wonderful directors, Tom Morris and Marion Elliott and Nicholas Heitner, pulled this thing together and made an iconic production. And they're reaping the rewards now. And I can afford another shirt too. So,
so you're not begrudging the way the rewards get passed up the supply chain, basically?
Not in the slightest, no.
And we're calling this session Writer as Creative Catalyst. So you're the catalyst. How did it get picked up? Because it was, as you say, it was decades before it got picked up.
I mean, I would like to say it was kind of organized by an agent, but it doesn't work that way. Not in my world, I don't think. What seems to happen is that someone picks it up by accident. And in my case, I'll tell you exactly what happened. The book, as I said, had been out there. No one paid too much attention to it at all for 20-odd years. Then the National Theatre decided they would do family shows, and they created a wonderful show of His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, which is amazing, with some puppets. Then they did one called Coram Boy by Jamila Gavin, also wonderful, and both lasted for 2 years in rep at the National. So 4 years on, they were looking for another project to see if they could follow their success. And there was a wonderful man called Tom Morris, who was an artistic director there, who had worked with handspring puppets, these amazing South African puppeteers, quite extraordinary people. And he wanted to bring a show to the big stage at the National Theatre, not with puppets on the peripheral, but center stage. These were going to be the stars. So he was looking for a story where there was some kind of animal center stage. The star was going to be an animal. And he read books, he asked questions for years and years and years, went home for Christmas. And his mum said to him, Tom, I just heard a program on the radio the other day called Desert Island Discs. And on it there was this man with an unpronounceable name who had just written a book a while ago called War Horse, and he talked about it very fondly, and his wife said it was his best book. And I went out and I got it from an Oxfam shop, and she said, it's wonderful, you've got to read it. And luckily, Tom did what his mother said. Without that, there would be no show of War Horse in the first place. And then what happens, if you're talking about the next little generation, was that it was in its first year in the West End at the New London Theatre, where it is now. And who walks in off the street with her daughter, who was very keen on horses, but Steven Spielberg's producer, a lady called Kathleen Kennedy, who had done E.T. and Schindler's List and all these things. So she walks off the street, sees the show, is blown away by it, as everyone is who sees it, and immediately rings up her friend and says, look, Stephen, you better come over here quick, because this is amazing. He comes over a week or so later, sees it, I think, 2 or 3 times. I hope reads the book. Then after that, he goes down to the Imperial War Museum and he kind of gets engaged with the First World War, which is not necessarily one of the wars that Americans grew up with in their culture, and then he makes the film. So it's not organized. This is Lady Luck.
Do you like the film?
I love the film for what it does to people who see it. People come out.
They cry, basically. I cried almost non-stop. I mean, it was...
You live through extraordinary moments. I mean, there are scenes there, I mean, I'll just give you a couple. There's one which you'll remember, where Joey the horse is charging through no man's land and getting caught up in the wire, and it just makes your heart bleed. And then there's that wonderful moment where the German soldier and the Tommy are meeting each other in the middle, and it's delicately and wittily and poignantly done. Yes, there are things that I think are better, but then they'll apply to the stage. I think there are wonderful things on the stage, but nothing, neither the film nor the play, is as good as the book.
Just out of interest, how many of you here have either seen the book, seen the play, seen the film, or read the book? How many of you? Okay, so actually most people here have consumed War Horse.
Could I ask a more delicate question here? How many people have seen the film? Okay. How many people have seen the play? I want you to be honest here. How many people have read the book?
Well, that is not bad, actually. That is not bad. That is not... No, come on. That is... I think you should be pretty darn happy with that. But look, it sounds like... I mean, it sounds like a very, if I may put it this way, haphazard process by which books find their way to life beyond. I mean, that process is... Is there anything you could do or could have done to have kind of made it happen, to commercialize it, to sort of... It would be around agents and a kind of industry of selling options and stuff.
Do you know, I hope not. Because I think immediately you write it, for instance, with that in mind, with an audience in mind, or with the theatre in mind, or a film in mind. I think somehow you take the magic away from it. I mean, this is a story written by a horse, told in the first person. There's no way I ever thought that would come to the screen or to the stage. I wrote it because I wanted to tell the story of the universal suffering of the First World War. And this was the means I used to tell it. And a lot of people who can't suspend disbelief, that's most grown-up people, who find it difficult. Children don't. As long as they get there right away, they're right in there and they can believe it. But if cynics start it, then it's quite hard. But children don't do cynicism. That happens when you're about, what, 16, 15?
It's getting younger, I think.
It's getting younger, yeah.
14. You can't, once you've sold it, it's an interesting feature of the business, this. You're the instigator of it all.
Yeah.
Once you've given it to Steven Spielberg, you don't really have much control over it, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but I didn't give it to him. I sold it to him. Well, there is a difference, isn't there? And the truth is, you don't have to do it. I mean, I think authors who grumble, you really can't grumble. You don't have to take the money, you know? I was advised by the wonderful, wonderful man, Philip Pullman, when I was worried about the National Theatre making a play of my book, War Horse, about the First World War, with puppets. That's what they said they wanted to do, and I thought this sounded completely absurd. Which it is, completely absurd. And I rang him up and I said, what do I do? You've had something put on by the National Theatre. And he said, you have to make the judgment. You look at the record of the director, look at the record of the theatre. If you think they are people in whom you can have confidence, then yes, sell your property. But whatever you do, if you don't do it. And I think in both cases, with the National Theatre and Spielberg, the decision was taken. I mean, I felt with the National Theatre, frankly, enormously flattered that people who were at the top of their profession in British arts, you know, whether it was lighting or it was design or music or whatever, they were all going to bring their talents to my story.
If anyone could make it work, they were going to make it work.
It was going to be them.
Yeah.
And if then Spielberg comes along, well, I must tell you a story about Spielberg.
Okay.
I have a little joke in my house, which is a true joke. I'm a fiction writer, but this is true. For certainly 30 years in my house, writing my little stories, there was a kind of a family joke, and the joke was this: that if the phone rings don't answer it. But we had to answer it because the project my wife Claire and I ran down the road, Farms for City Children, needed sometimes immediate attention because there were 35 kids up there, so you had to answer the phone. And all the family hated the fact that we answered the phone. And I would get up when the phone rang on a Saturday and a Sunday, and I would say, I've got to answer it because it could be Steven Spielberg. And it was. There you go.
In a way, the fact, I mean, we're meant to be selling Great Britain here. I don't really think we need to do that, but it is interesting, isn't it? If you had written the book in a country that didn't have the same, I suppose you'd call it a creative infrastructure of theatres that have a reputation, so film directors, producers go to them. In a way, the network effect is quite important.
Well, it is, but I do think what Anglo-Saxon countries have a reputation for, going way, way back, 200 years and more, and this was reflected in the opening ceremony of the Olympics the other day. We have an extraordinary range of children's books and children's writers going way, way back. You know, whether you're talking about Lewis Carroll or Beatrix Potter, right up to the present day of J.K. Rowling, the masters and mistresses of this craft. Many, many of them, by no means all of them, of course not, but hugely, hugely, we are great story makers, great storytellers. Indeed, I would say about that whole ceremony, it was put together by a bunch of story makers, which is what made it rather strange and magical.
And gave great weight to children's writing.
Absolutely.
There, right, so we've got the book, we've got the play, we've got the film, we've got the Warhorse app now, haven't we?
Yes.
Tell me about that and how you wrote the code for that.
It's in the process. He knows I write by hand and I can barely do my machine, so we're going to have a problem here. But my publishers came to me very, very excited and said, we're going to make an app. And it's going to be gloriously made. And they showed me the most extraordinary app of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. And readings by T.S. Eliot and Seamus Heaney and Ted Hughes, and you could just sort of do funny things with the screen and you could change who's reading it. It was just amazing. I didn't know what an app was until they came along. Now I'm beginning to know, and I was given, what do you call the little paddy things? iPads. And is it an iPad? Thank you. I was given one.
The pod is the little one, the pad is
No, it's a big one. And I can do funny things with my fingers now. I'm enjoying it. But it's a completely new world to me. I still write by hand.
Yeah. And but technology provides opportunities. I mean,
hugely.
Yeah,
hugely. And I do think more and more that's going to be the case. And I'm all for it, frankly. I don't actually care how people get their stories. I think the important thing is that we get our stories. That's what's really important. Certainly for young people who are growing up with this, in their mother's milk they're growing up with technology. And they come to it so easily, with such a facility, and I have to say, with such enthusiasm. And if you can get them into literature and stories because they love the technology, fine. I'm not bothered at all.
We're at a pretty interesting time, thanks to technology, for publishers and for writers.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the role of publishers, because we have a pretty strong publishing industry in this country, but it's not an easy time for them, is it? I mean, there are people questioning whether you need publishers anymore. More and more people can pass off really quite credible-looking volumes of paper with print on, you know, self-published books. What does your publisher do for you?
Well, I frankly couldn't write without my publisher. They are my support system. The editor, first of all, which is critical, and everyone forgets that. When you send in a manuscript, what you want is someone sensitive and intelligent who's going to read it and respond to it, and so that you can respond back. That's absolutely critical, for me anyway, as an author. And then there's the whole business of the way a book is put together, the getting in of the illustration, the design of the cover. All of this is completely critical, particularly for children, because they've got to have something they want to look at, they want to touch, they want to open up.
The book is an experience.
It is absolutely an experience. And
if you didn't have a publisher who just pulled all of that stuff together, you would probably invent one and say, you know what I need? I need someone who can sort of organize the marketing, sort out the logistics, get the printed version printed. And
yes. Now, for me, I have to say, I stand sort of shoulder to shoulder with the publishing industry as an author, because, and I'm not just saying that, they are how we earn our livelihood, these people. And the relationship between us, the one of mutual benefit and mutual trust and support, is critical. And the best publishing houses you work with for years and years and years and years, and you build up that. And it's a friendship, finally. It's more important, I have to say, than the figures that are produced. It is something that's very, very interreliant. It's critical.
Another big issue, which technology is bearing on authors in a very large way, is intellectual property.
Yeah.
Now, you come across as a very enthusiastic person who likes children or people generally to read your work. Does it worry you that it gets easier for them to reproduce the work without actually paying for it at the end of the day?
Yes, it does, because when you write something, when you make a story, when you make an illustration, whatever, that is your work. And actually, that's what pays your rent. It's what puts your family through college and university, and you have as much right to the wherewithal from what you do as anyone else has. And I think that's really something that's very critically not remembered now by an awful lot of young people growing up, for instance, who have been able to access music, for instance, rather easily, without thinking actually who made that music. The making of music, the making of books, this is a risk-taking enterprise. And for the vast majority of writers, it is not massively successful financially. They need the money, that's for sure. If you get lucky, all right, people can look and say, well, what's he talking about? He's shaking hands with Spielberg. But let's understand that the vast, vast majority of writers are scratching a living, and for someone to download a story that has been written and not pay a little bit to it. I mean, I love the library thing we have in this country, which I think is really important. When someone takes a book out of a library, the writer gets something. Not a great deal, but something.
Yeah. Well, in a way, you highlight the business model in so many creative industries. It is basically very hit and miss industry, isn't it? I mean, in fact, it's like pharmaceuticals in that regard. It's hit and miss. You produce 100 drugs, and one is a blockbuster, and 99, 30 maybe go on to do something, and 70 are absolutely useless. You are somebody who really is blockbuster that presumably pays more than the rent, and a lot that are a great deal.
I mean, I've been writing for 40 years.
Yeah. This wasn't begrudging you. Your warmer success.
But for the first 10 years, my accountant was saying, why are you bothering to send anything information to the revenue? They're just laughing at you. And for the next 10, nothing much happened either. The truth is, and the trouble is, you only hear about writers when they're successful. Yeah. And the number of people who write and write and write, and actually write wonderful stuff, and it never gets to the stage, and it never gets even to a softback sometimes. Those are the people, really, who are the foundation of the whole world of literature we have in this country, because you've got to grow an author. An author has to start by not selling. Poet has to start by not selling. Yes, you can get lucky. You can sit down in a tea shop in Edinburgh and write the book that changes the world of literature for children. But the vast majority, it simply doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And then, 20 years, 30 years later, because you've practiced and worked at it, something might work out. Or someone walks in off the street and sees a play that, who knows. But it is not something, we shouldn't shortchange that long, long apprenticeship that writers and creative people have to make in order that they might one day get lucky.
The more I write, the luckier I get, is I suppose, to paraphrase, I think something said...
Certainly, you've got to keep throwing the dice.
You keep throwing the dice, yeah. Well, no one, I don't think anyone begrudges you the success of Warhorse, Michael. It's a really terrific product, and it's had an enormous impact, and has made people cry the world over in a good way, exactly the right way.
I'll go to my grave. He made people cry.
Fine. A very eye-opening way of framing the issue of the First World War. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Morpurgo. Thank you, my God. Very good.